Hi, I'm Marianne Clyde. I'm owner of Business Your Way, presenting business coaching that's simple, focused, and effective. And today I have a really exciting guest. One of the principles of my business is that we really like to have continue education, continuing learning. And when I met Jonathan Bohn, he has principles to build your business and build the value of your business that are simple and effective. And so I wanted to interview him today just so we can learn what they are. And this is why I'm having Jonathan as a guest today, because he understands the challenges small business owners face while they're operating a new business. As he was working as a consultant for Georgia and South Carolina Small Business Development Center, he coached hundreds of small business owners, assisting them with strategy, marketing, and overall business development. Jonathan practiced what he preached by leading his family's retail jewelry business through a transition from a mom and pop store to a second generation sibling owned business, adding e-commerce as well as updating systems. He included an integrated inventory, POS, effectively doubling revenue to over 1.7 million and increasing the company's value 5 times. Additionally, having pursued dozens of acquisitions, Jonathan has seen firsthand how buyer and seller expectations can derail the many deals, the whole process. So Jonathan believes in small businesses and the people who own them because they change people's lives, communities, and the world. Building and growing businesses should not be random, he told me, and it should be an exciting journey with a well thought out plan. So Jonathan started his company, SoCo Ventures, to make growing and realizing value from one's company attainable. He uses proven frameworks to coach owners as they build enduringly profitable businesses. He's a certified value builder and business made simple coach. He holds an MBA in finance from Emory University and a BS in computer science from Furman University. So let me just welcome Jonathan Bohn. Too bad I don't have a drum roll, Jonathan. I'm really
Wow, I was gonna say
excited.
that's amazing. Thank you, Marianne, for having me here today to talk about this. I'm really excited to be here.
I am so excited to learn this from you because you've been talking about it since I met you. And you're good at it and you have such a heart for businesses. So what we're going to talk about is just the 8 drivers of company value. Can I just ask
Yeah,
you right up front why that's even important?
yeah. I mean, it's so important because I think back to I'll start with Stephen R. Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of those habits is begin with the end in mind. And so many business owners, when we start our businesses, we're not thinking about the end. We're not thinking about how we're going to exit or what we're doing. That's so far off into the future. Michael Gerber from E-Myth calls it an entrepreneurial seizure, right? We have this entrepreneurial seizure. We get out there and we enjoy the work, or we have the passion, and we work hard. I mean, business owners work extremely hard to build their businesses, provide great service, great products. But then when they get to the end, a lot of times we found from the Exit Institute, 75% of owners are disappointed a year after they leave. And that can be for a variety of reasons. But, that when you've put so much heart and passion into something, to have the end of the journey be so disappointing is just heartbreaking to me. And so that's really where that comes from, is wanting business owners to think about kind of the end, and use that Stephen R. Covey, like, hey, maybe you're not there, maybe you're not thinking about it, but if you start looking at these 8 drivers and start using those to guide your decision, you will have more options, which really give you more freedom when you get to the end. Because when you have options and choice, now you're not being forced into things. You're not being forced into, maybe taking a lower price when you're exiting, or you're not being forced to sell, are forced to close the doors, unfortunately, a lot of times, because so many businesses don't sell. So that, to me, why that's my passion. That's why it's so great, is because I really just, I want people to realize that value that they can get from their business and their hard work.
That is so important. And I just really appreciate your taking time to remind us that yes, working on our business is important, but
Yeah.
keeping the end in mind is key. I mean, it's good to have long-term goals and short-term goals. So we got 8 drivers of company value. So what would you say is the first one, and why is it important?
Yeah. So the first one is really an easy one. It's financial performance, right? And this one is where most of the business owners, it's easy for them to understand, maybe a little bit harder to do. And financial performance is just your top line revenue and your bottom line net sales, right? And I mean, that's business. We're all looking at our P&Ls and trying to drive that revenue and financial growth. And that so that's pretty easy for most people to understand. One thing is not to get the blinders on when we talk about value is a lot of people only think about revenue, right? And you can grow a huge company and make $0 on the net bottom line. So that's one of those things you want to keep the top line and bottom line both healthy. Sometimes being smaller with a much more healthy net margin can be much more rewarding. Um, there's a kind of a hidden element though to financial performance that I found working with a lot of businesses that really matter, particularly when you go to sell. This is when they kind of found, and um, that's the how are you tracking that? How can I validate those numbers, right? And that's the quality of reporting. That's the word, the quality of your reporting and your earnings, right? And that's really what I found when I try to go through so many acquisitions. People say, "Oh yeah, we have this," and you're like, "Well, show me your P&L." It's like P&L. I haven't ever put one together, right? Like I just look at my bank statement. So if you're just looking at your bank statement, right? That's like one level. I mean, you can manage. A lot of people do it that way, but you're getting
Right.
that's just your cash. That's not really your P&L, right? Cash and revenue are two different things. Um, so that's really you got to think about that quality of earnings. On the other side of that spectrum is getting an audit, right? You can get a CPA to give you an audit. If you have audited financials, right? Me as a buyer, I'm going to look at it and say, yeah, I can have a third party that's validated and trusted these numbers. And
So
most
most
people
people
look
are
at it.
terrified of audits, and you're
Yeah.
inviting an audit.
Well, I think about it this way, Marianne. Like most people have bought and sold homes, right? And
Right.
so when you go to sell your home, once you get the contract, the buyer's going to do due diligence, and they're going to come in and they're going to get a home inspection. It's going to happen. So if you have a house, you can hire the home inspector to come in and do a home inspection and find out what troubles you're going to run into before you get way down the way. And you can just save yourself. I mean, yeah, it's costly up front, but you save yourself so much time and effort down the way because you just know what you need to address. And so, and plus, we know that it increases the value. We're talking about value. It increases the value. So if I told you, hey, you want to sell your business and you're going to sell it at 3 times your net earnings, right? But hey, it's a few $1,000s to get an audit, but that'll increase your multiple. You get a 5 times multiple or
Right.
maybe 6 times multiple because it's just validated, right? The audit's paid for itself 4 times over.
Oh, and I think
And
people really, yeah, I think people really like to see numbers to validate what you're saying you're worth and what you're selling. So that's
so,
huge.
so
So
it's huge. It's
absolutely.
just, yeah.
So it's
So that's kind of
important.
financial performance.
Yeah. So it's important to know then your growth potential, right?
Yeah. So that's the second one is growth potential. And so this one is you want to look at, what products and services can you really scale? Are they scalable? Um, because that's where, particularly when a buyer coming through that buyer's perspective, is you've got to leave a little something for them. So like, where's the business going to go? Because we want to grow, and so that growth potential is trying to identify those. And we look at those, and you can think about that in, is it I have what it calls TRV. So is it teachable? Is it repeatable? And is it valuable? Right. And so that's what you want to think about. An example of that, it's been a little bit harder, but is photography, if you think about a photography business, right? And you think about, you have wedding photographers, you have school photographers, and maybe you have like sports team photographers. Maybe those are like three different sections that we have. And you look at those on those three scales. So, is it teachable? Well, maybe wedding photos are pretty low on teachable because that's really an art form. It's hard to tell somebody how to, in the moment, take pictures of certain things and photojournal it. But on the school side, school picture, I mean, you set the kid right there, you put the camera right here, you put the setting right there, you push the button, right? Very teachable. Like
Right.
it's not, it's hard, not very hard. So you look at those, you can rank these like on a 1 to 10 scale. Is it repeatable? People, weddings, not very repeatable, right? I mean, most people hopefully maybe only have one in a lifetime. So, it's not a lot of repeat business in that. But school pictures, on the other hand, or those sports ones, they're happening annually, right? People
Right.
want to see their kids grow up, so they're taking a picture every year. Um, and so they have that, and then it's valuable. And this is where the wedding photography comes in. On a valuable score, that's maybe hitting a 10, right? Because I'm only doing it one time. So extremely valuable
Right.
versus the school pictures maybe fall a little bit less valuable. I mean, they carry some values, like parents want to see them. But, when you add up all three of those, which one's easier to repeat? You kind of, most of the time it's like, well, yeah, weddings are great, but it's hard to really scale that when you're the product, right? And it's not something that I can scale. Those school pictures may be something that you can scale. I don't know if people are really still doing school pictures, just now
Well,
with Zoom.
probably not this year, right?
Yeah. But that's, so your growth potential is you want to look at, buyers looking at that growth potential. You want to look at, I mean, that's how you're going to increase your revenue, right? So we're always trying to think about, um, how we're going to grow and scale the business. It's just important.
So you have revenue coming from one-time happenings, but there's always a recurring revenue stream in the background that's
Yeah.
keeping things stable, even if the big things don't come in. So that's really,
Yeah.
really
We're
helpful.
going to get to reoccurring revenue. That one's
Okay,
kind of a little
so
bit.
I won't jump ahead.
But that's all right. Yeah. They're all interrelated. They're all interrelated.
Yeah, well, that's what's important, and that's what makes them work. So,
Yeah.
so, so tell me what number three is,
So the third one we call the Switzerland structure.
and
It's a
what does
cute
that mean?
name. So, but we all know the country of Switzerland, right? And the crazy thing about history is they haven't really joined any war, so they were always neutral, right? They are known for their neutrality. I mean, the entire country had a vote on a referendum for them to join the UN. Crazy history, but as a nation, they really hold this neutrality at heart. It's just core to that nation. And so that's really what we're talking about with the Switzerland structure is having that neutrality when it comes to three areas. So when it comes to your customers, when it comes to your employees, and then when it comes to your suppliers, right? And what I mean by that is customer concentration. So looking at customer, right? If your largest customer is making up 25% of your business, like, what would happen? Ask yourself, if my largest client left, what would happen, right? Would I survive? How big of a hit would it take? Could I, so that's one of those is you don't want to be dependent on any one customer. So making sure that you have good customer diversification where, hey, if one customer leaves, it's not really a big thing. Same thing on the employee front, right? Like, I mean, I came from a small business, man. We wore a lot of different hats. I mean,
Right.
and they were just employees that, we sat up at night and was like, please don't let them leave because if they leave, I don't know how I'm gonna get through the day. And
Right.
that's just something that I was always like, that's pretty normal, but we want to be working kind of away from that because turnover is inevitable. People are growing, things are growing, and so you just don't know what life circumstances may carry. So you want to have that neutrality with your employees too, where you have, good cross training. You have plans where any one person leaves, the business isn't built around one employee. And then one that a lot of people forget is suppliers. And this was one that actually in our business was the same thing. So if you have suppliers, we're in the jewelry business and we had some really good sellers, best sellers, but I could only get those from one supplier. And it always worried me because, this supplier was a little, they're always interesting, right? It's an interesting person. And sometimes you're like, I don't know how they stay in business. And I just thought if he left, what am I going to do? Like, I mean, if he
Right.
just up and I mean, because I got a call one time. I thought they were going to have to clear bankruptcy, is what had happened, right? Because I don't remember exactly the details of the story, but there was something that indicated they were having some financial trouble, and I don't remember if they were calling me, but I got that gut tinge, like, oh my gosh, like in a few months, if I can't order these products, what am I going to do? Like, and so if you have your best sellers, finding a few suppliers that you can get those where you can adjust and not being reliant on any supplier kind of coming in that way. So that, and that's difficult. These aren't always easy. It's easy to talk about, always much more difficult to do. That's the Switzerland structure is neutrality across those three.
So really important to do really a regular checkup, I guess,
Yeah.
on so where are we with our suppliers, where our employees, with so many small businesses are just solely dependent on you, the owner,
Yeah.
and that just can't be. Otherwise, if you're not teaching anybody how to do everything, then you're
Right.
you're in a between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a balance. I mean, sometimes you can't get all of that out, but that's it's a way of diversifying risk out of your business.
And staying aware of the future,
Just
always
staying
staying
aware.
aware of the future. Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about valuation a little bit.
Yeah.
The teeter
The
totter.
the teeter totter. Yeah. So the teeter totter is another one of those values, and that comes from the playground where you had the old seesaw. I call them a seesaw. I think the value there was from Canada, so there's a little bit of cultural difference. But you got the seesaw, the kids on the playground, right? And if you have the light kid and the heavy kid, and so they one side goes up, the other side goes down. And so that's the imagery, and it's really looking at cash flow, is looking at cash flow and that cash cycle that's coming into business. And so, is your business a cash drain or a cash fountain? Right,
Hmm.
is kind of another way that I think about that one. And so, and this is really important because a lot of people, you don't sell your business every day, but coming from a buyer's perspective, the seller needs to understand, the owner of the business that's selling needs to understand that they may want to sell and get their $1 million and exit or whatever their number is. So, the seller's going to come in and write that check, but he also has to write a second check that day. And that check is to the business itself to cover that working capital. Because we all know that there has to be some cash in the business, right? For it to operate. Like you just can't operate day one with zero cash in the bank. So, you got to understand that is, where that buyer is coming from. And so if you have this really heavy working capital, cash flow suck that he's got to write this person has to write a really big check, that's going to lower the value of your business because I'm looking at the total amount that it's going to take me to buy it, not just the amount that I'm paying out to the owner, right? And so some of those places that you see that is, how quickly are you receiving your money? So, I mean, are you giving people 30-day, 90-day, 180-day terms? So if you're extending people a lot of credit, that takes a lot of cash that I have to float, right? Um, and that's the same thing on the accounts payable. Are you paying people right away, or are you being able to not pay them for 30, 60 days? Are you negotiating those things? And that's the cash flow cycle. I can talk about that for a long time as well. But it's how much cash does it take me to operate this business? And the more that cash takes, the heavier that is, the valuation is going down, right? We're shooting them
And
off.
and I have banker friends telling me all the time that cash is king, cash is king. They
Yeah,
keep pounding, cash
right.
is king, because you just can't be waiting if your people aren't paying you for 120 days and you're expected to pay either cash up front or within 30
Right.
days. That just doesn't balance out, does it? And
balance out. And there's the opposite. I mean, that's a lot of people get in that. But there are businesses where I mean, think about it in the reverse. I've seen some like in the HVAC where they'll get 30, 60 days to pay for a unit, right? But they're getting a half deposit up front from their customer, and then they're getting the payment when they install it. So they actually have they can have the reserve reverse, where I mean, they're getting floated cash that they get to hold for 30, 60 days before they've already collected from the customer, but they don't have to pay their supplier for like another 60 days,
yeah, that
right?
sounds like a
So
wise way.
I mean, you're like, that's just scalable, right? Because as I scale, I'm just generating cash. I'm not having to come up with more cash as I scale my business, right? And that's the thing. It goes back to that growth potential and that scalability, because a lot of people you've heard where you can skip, you hear people growing so fast they grow themselves out of the business, and that's the problem, right? Because if you're growing so fast, you're having to come up with so much cash if it's draining it. So the more cash and more cash I have to continue my growth, and that's where you're not making any net income, right? Because you're just burning it. You're just staying in the red. And the bigger you grow, the bigger the red grows.
Right.
Um, and so that's where you got to really look at that. That cash flow cycle can be so important, and you want to make sure that you have that on there. I mean, that
Yeah.
happened for us in the retail too, because it's one thing I remember when we were at the jewelry show was, are you buying for the sales that you want to have, right? So as our sales increased, our inventory number, we had to hold more inventory, right? Because you just know that you got to have a bigger selection, and you're going to have some losers, and you just, that's just kind of the way it is. So if you want to increase by 20%, are you buying 20% more product that you have to sell? Um, and we try to get that down where you're trying to narrow that or just in time. Um, excuse me, just in time inventory where you're getting that window down between purchase and having to buy stuff. But it's really easy to see in retail business when you just got a lot of cash. And that's what I always told people: is inventory is cash sitting on the shelf. I mean, just look
Yeah.
at your inventory and just think dollar bills stacked up.
Yeah. And everything's this huge balance.
Yeah.
But then you promised me later that we were going to talk about recurring revenue too. So where does that
Yeah.
fit in here?
So recurring revenue, from a buyer's perspective, when you're trying to build a business, is just kind of like the mecca, right? Because one thing that you're trying to convince when you're trying to sell your business or exit it, you're trying to convince the buyer that the revenue is still going to be there when you leave,
Right.
right? Like it is going to go. And so I always say there's a difference between reoccurring and reoccurring, right? So there's the occurring and the occurring. So sometimes we have a lot that occur. So that goes back to that like photographer. Maybe they're super busy and they just got a great funnel and pipeline that's
Hmm.
just churning out customers. But and maybe that pipeline will occur. The sales will continue to occur, um, but that's not coming from the same customers, right? Like you're always having to source. But reoccurring is one of those where it's just that easy, like money is just coming in the door, and it's always we heard that it's always easier to keep a customer than it is to win a new one, right? It's just lower cost to do that. So
So would that be like a membership?
a
If you
membership. So yeah,
sell,
so there's six transaction types
yeah.
that we can kind of run through on that one. Those six transaction types are consumables is kind of at the bottom. And these go in order. So I'm going in order of less valuable to like most valuable, right?
Okay.
So
I'm taking
consumables.
notes.
Take notes, take notes. So consumables, these are like, it's coffee, right? Like I consume my coffee every morning. I got it here on my desk, right? And I'm going to run out of coffee and I got to go back and rebuy it. So as a customer, like that's one of those things where now maybe I'll switch brands. That's where it's a little weak in that regard. But I'm going to buy my coffee, right? So I'm going to go buy it from Starbucks. I'm going to buy it from the grocery store. So that consumable model is kind of that first transaction type. Then we have what is called a sunk cost consumable. So this was, you can think of like a Keurig or something like that, where I've bought a machine, now I've got to buy the little capsules. And if I'm the only one that makes the capsules, right? Because early on with that, they were the only one that made the capsules, and then they opened up their business model and now allowed other people. Um, but I the sell the machine, and then I make a lot of revenue on the backside. The other one for me, as a guys, the Gillette. I mean, that's their model, right? I sell you the handle for the razor, and then I get to keep selling you the razors.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I got to keep consuming.
Or
So
printers and ink.
printers and ink. There you go. So yeah, that's a good. That's that sunk cost. I've already bought the printer, so I've sunk my money into that, and now I'm consuming the ink. So yeah, then beyond that is subscriptions. Subscriptions have a start and an end date. We're all pretty familiar with these magazines, Wall Street Journal, newspaper. The real key there is once a year you're having to, or 2 years, 1 or 2 years, you're having to renew. So you're having to go out and renew that subscription or those customers, right, to have them come back. Sometimes that's a pretty easy sell, but there usually is a stop date because I'm only doing 6 issues, 12 issues, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a sunk cost subscription, so much like the consumables. And you can think of this one is, for us in our retail, was we had a POS system, so we bought the hardware, and then we had to pay for the software to run it. So we were monthly paying for the software service that worked with our hardware. Same thing for like the traders, the Bloomberg terminals. They buy that, and then they buy a subscription to the information that's supplied through that terminal. So
QuickBooks.
that's was that
QuickBooks. You have to
QuickBooks.
pay
Yeah,
your monthly.
pay your monthly dues. We'll get to that one. That was a little more of a software as the SaaS model.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good one. That hold on to that thought. Because that was sunk cost subscription. So that's more of like an auto renewal, which you see
Okay.
a lot. So the next one up is the auto renewal subscriptions, right? And this is where you're really seeing where it's that software as a service model.
Yep.
And the nuance is a little bit of a nuance, but how it differs for subscriptions is there's no end date, right? Like till you call QuickBooks and say, cancel my subscription, they got your credit card, and every month they're just going to ding it, right?
Because they got you by the
And
throat.
there's no, and that's a little nuance, but there's no end date, there's no stop. And I mean that, I have to be so diligent because it's so easy to sign up for $7 here, $8 there, and then you're paying for all these subscriptions, which is how they get, why they like that. But that's that auto renewal. So it's the auto renewal subscription. You can also see this in the physical world with storage units, right? So storage units, you go put your stuff in the storage unit, right? You rent the storage unit, and then they just start dinking you every month. And so until you go and clear that bad boy out and call them and say, stop charging me, they're just going to keep charging your credit card every month.
And
right?
you forget about it.
And you forget about it, and they don't forget to charge you.
Right.
But they're not coming back to you and saying, like, a year later, like, do you want to renew your storage unit, right?
Right.
Iron Mountain has the same thing. So on a B2B scale, if you're having to store, my dad was a doctor, so they had to store medical records, and they had to hold them for 10 years, and so they literally just had a storage unit where they just had to like store this stuff. They don't call you up and say, do you still want your files? Of course you do. But, it's, they just keep charging you. So that's the auto renewal subscription. Now when I said that, that as far as recurring revenue is, once you get them in the door, that acquisition is great. And then the last one is just long-term contracts. If you can just get a 10-year contract, I spent several years in college licensing, and we had 10-year deals on both with the colleges and with the manufacturers, and so that, if you have 10-year contracts and only 5%, 10% of those are coming up, 10% come up every year, you're guaranteed not to lose more than 10% of your revenue in any year, right? And that's if you had a zero renewal rate and you added no new customers. So that's where that one is just. That's pretty ironclad if you have contracts for that length of term or something like that. So long-term contracts is kind of that high end. Now, you might not be able to get to those. I mean, there's a lot of business models that you just, I don't see how I've never figured out how to take a lawn care business and get a 10-year contract, right? Like you can't walk in. Would you like a 10-year contract for me mowing your lawn? That's what I don't even know if I'm going to live here for 10 years, right?
That's right. That's right. But a landlord, that's a great model, though that's why you can get a better rate on your rent if you sign a 5-year contract or a long-term contract with them, and then you don't have to worry about your rent going up. So it's a win-win
Okay,
for
exactly.
everybody.
That's okay with that.
So,
So,
okay, so recurring
so
revenue
recurring
is
revenue, and
important
I
to
mean that,
figure out.
yeah, you can go into that. There's all sorts of stuff that you can go into that for hours, but definitely think about it. Something to think about.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the next point, you're talking about customer satisfaction. If you have a deal that works for you, then your customers are happy.
yeah, yeah. So customer satisfaction is also one of those that you really want to look at and measure. And that's
Hmm.
really the trick is you need to measure customer satisfaction. And the way that we like to do that is called the Net Promoter Score. And you've probably received one of these. You've seen this. It's a standard. Gallup has developed this a long time ago. There's been Harvard Business Review cases done on it. Some call it the perfect question, but it's how likely is it that you would refer our business on a scale of 1 to 10, right? So how likely are you to refer our business? And on that scale of 1 to 10. And so, and you probably received these. And what you want to look at is the Net Promoter Score has math that's actually to that. So you take your 9 and 10s, right? So that'll give you a certain number of percentage. And then you take all your 6s and belows, those are considered detractors. So, if they're not giving you a 7 or an 8, that's where most people kind of land. 7 or 8, like, oh, just 7. Yeah, good, but not great or anything that made me really good. And so, but 6 below, they probably had some experience where they're maybe giving you saying, yeah, I had a 5 experience at that place. You don't want to go there, right? So they're the detractors. So you take your promoters, subtract your detractors, and come up with a score. So if you
Okay.
had 20% in your detractors and you had 30% in your promoters, you've got a net promoter score of 10%, right? That 7 and 8 are just like that no man's land. They're not really doing you any good. They're pleasantly satisfied, but they're not really helping you out. They're not giving you that word of mouth that you want. And so, and what they found in the research is people, it's their net promoter scores are much lower than they think, right? The average is like 10%, 10%.
Really?
I mean, if we think about Apple and these people that are just known for this crazy customer service, they're making like 50 on there, right? Like their
Okay.
net promoter score is only 50%. So, they're only getting, their detractors and the people that are giving them 9 and 10s. So, I mean, it's a really, really hard thing to do, but it's also a way to measure that customer satisfaction, right? And to know where you're standing, and it gives you something to work on to say, hey, my goal for next year is to add 2 points to my net promoter score. We like seeing that happen about twice a year, sending
Hmm.
that survey out to your customers, doing that twice a year. I also worked on it where I tried to get it into like you can get it into like a rolling method. So maybe it's like a 30-day follow up with your customers and ask them, at that point, after you've finished installing the HVAC unit, 30 days later, you send them that follow up and you're asking them that on a rolling basis. So
Hmm.
it's not like a big thing. You can kind of put it into your
Hmm.
operational procedures too, but something to track. But customer satisfaction is so important because we know that the 9s and 10s, we know that word of mouth is just the best. I mean, that's what social media is built off of, right? Like my
So,
friends tell me, that's the best recommendation you can get.
yeah, so I guess it's important too when you ask how likely are you to recommend us or whatever. Would it be good to add a question, why or why not?
Yeah, so usually there's always an open-ended question after that. So you have
Hmm.
one that is your quantitative. After that's a good to follow up with a qualitative, open-ended to say, hey, why did you give us this score? Right? Like, why were we not a 10? Or how could we
How
become
could
a
we
10?
do better? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, how can we do better? So I mean, it's a great way of getting feedback and getting that feedback customer loop because you may think, hey, it's trying to think of a good example, but hey, I thought the color red was the best product thing, and everybody's like, I can't stand the color red on your packaging. You should change it to blue. You get that enough, right? Like,
right,
listen to your customers,
right,
because it's not, and you may think that red was the best color in the world for that. So that's where you can get that. So yeah, definitely adding some open-ended questions. You can ask a few more questions after that. You've seen as you've gone through those, but a few,
right.
usually at least one open-ended question, just on like, how could we do better? How could we reach a 10?
Hmm.
Sometimes you can get fancy with them, and based on what their score is, if they give you a 9 or 10, maybe you ask them, hey, thanks for that. What did you like the best? So you're getting
Right,
like why they gave you the 9 or 10. If they
right.
give you under a 6, you can say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like, what could we do better? And so you can kind of split those two. You can use, some automation techniques and stuff as a
That's
way to
right.
kind of do that and get that. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to get that feedback from customers.
And I guess it's really important too to keep those surveys really tight. I mean,
Mm,
I'll answer a survey if it's going to take 5 minutes or less. But just the
yeah.
other day, I got a survey from someone that I actually utilized their services, but they said, please take 20 or 30 minutes to do this survey. And I went,
Yeah.
click, nope. I just,
But,
it
yeah.
was like, I don't have 20 or
Yeah,
30 minutes.
surveying is that's one of those challenges. Keeping it short and sweet, never going over kind of more 5 questions. I mean, you can maybe ask a little bit more,
Yep.
depending on what you're doing. If you're just wanting to get that feedback, I would suggest kind of just the 2 questions, that quick hit. If you want a little bit more feedback, you can do that. You can then add some type of incentive, right? So, hey, we're going to do a drawing for something, or you can say, hey, take our survey and get 10% off your next purchase, right? You can just give
Right.
that to everybody just to incentivize them. And that some of that's just respectful of the people's time. Like, it shows,
Correct.
hey, yes, you're your customer, but we respect your time. Everybody's got time. So you can think about that incentive piece too, to take that back where you can, yeah, I mean, and that encourages them to make another sale. I mean, like, now I got
Absolutely.
10%, I got to spend it, right?
Right.
That's
But
that's what I call, that's my wife's theory, and that's what I call psychological accounting.
right. That's right. It's the use of coupons. Look how much money I saved, even if you weren't going to do something anyway.
It's like, wait a minute,
But
but I'm still down net $40.
right? Yeah, it's all a psychological game, but it's so important to keep this stuff in mind because this stuff is so important when you're talking about how valuable is your company. If it's not valuable to your customer,
Right.
then it's not going to be a good sale to anybody else when it comes time to sell your company.
Yeah, yeah. People want to know, and that's the thing. If you can go to a buyer, I mean, if you go to the buyer and say, yeah, we have great customer satisfaction, the buyer's always going to be skeptical, right?
Right.
Like, everybody says that. Like, I mean, just the buyer is skeptical. So if you say, hey, look, we've surveyed our customers for the last 5 years, and we have a net promoter score of 25%, right, which is 10%, 12% over the average. I mean, like, what's the buyer? The buyer's gonna be like, all right, sign me up, right? I
Yeah.
don't want to recreate that wheel.
Yeah.
And so
Again,
that's,
numbers are really
yeah,
helpful when you're selling a company. They
and
want to know
validation.
exactly what you're getting. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So,
So tell me if what's principle 7 in your 8
so,
drivers?
so the seventh one is monopoly control,
What
and
does
you've
that
heard
mean?
this. So monopoly control is you're wanting to, as Warren Buffett talks about, building a moat around your business, right? So this is your setting up kind of your defenses and your unique, just how you defend yourself, right? So being setting yourself apart. We've heard unique selling proposition. So you hear those pieces, but it's really what differentiates you from your competitors, right? And sets you apart. And that's really a hard thing to do. And, a lot of people think that they have a competitive advantage. Um, Speaking of like customer service, everybody says that they have great customer service, right? Oh, we have great customer service. It separates us. But does it really, right? Like, goes back to the Net Promoter Score, can you really quantify that? Is it really separating you, right? Because I could ask 10 business owners, do you provide great customer service? And they're all going to tell me yes. Nobody's like, yeah, my customer service is pretty marginal. Never really had anybody tell me that before. So, I mean, some of them know that they need to do better, but they get in, and so it's some of the things that you really see. This is where you get into patents. You see people with patents, trademarks. Those set up defenses that like really barricade you when you can get those patents and trademarks and copyrights. So those are things that set you apart, because if I got the patent, then I've got legal ramification to come back.
Right.
But on those service-based businesses, it's like really, is it your quality? Is your quality product really that much better? I mean, it really has to be leaps and bounds, typically, for it to separate you in any way. And so that's that monopoly control, because there is if I have a product or service that the customer can't go get anywhere else, then I can charge higher prices, right? And if I can charge higher prices, then I have better margins. And if I have better margins, then I have more kind of a war chest, right? I got more cash that I can spend on marketing, and I can spend on building my customers and building my company, which gives me more diversification, more of monopoly in my industry, which means I can charge a bigger price. So it's what we call the virtuous cycle, right? It's kind of that upspin as you move away from being a commodity, right? Because the opposite end of that is being a commodity. So, where I can go get it from 20 different people, and the problem with being a commodity is price just gets driven to zero, because there's nothing that differentiates it from any of the other 10 places.
Right.
And most competitors start competing on price. And if you're competing on price, I mean, it's just a death spiral typically. And so monopoly control is being able to really set yourself up, differentiate yourself, build kind of that moat that allows you to charge higher prices. And that higher prices then, charges into more cash, and like I said, it puts on. So
Well,
that's monopoly control.
and Amazon has that, locked up as far as anything
Yeah.
anything you buy, you can have it by Prime delivery. So
Yeah.
boom, it is. It's on your
Well, that's
doorstep.
where I mean, that's the thing from comments. So that's a great example there. It's funny because it's like being in retail, we went to e-commerce, and we were a drugstore, small mom and pop, and we had to fulfill, our orders. Well, the general sentiment is now with Amazon, I mean, they've commoditized shipping to the point customer expectation is that I get it in 2 days. Well, that's extremely hard for us to fulfill an order and
Oh,
like
yes.
get it to somebody in 2 days. I mean, like we did not have systems and stuff in place, and we had 20 other things going on. But I mean, you tell your customer, they don't care, right? Like they don't, you're like, we never told you it would be there in 2 days, or we never guaranteed it. They're like, it's not here yet. They're calling after 3 days, like, where is it? And you're like,
Right.
that was a hand engraved piece. It takes me 3 weeks just to get it made. That was what's up. But yeah, I mean, getting things, and that's where they have commoditized that shipping. It's like everybody now. I mean, if you want to compete, that goes back to that monopoly. Really use your customer services. I mean, you've got to get it there in 2 days. They're getting it down to a day, right? And
Right.
so that's going to be extremely hard as retailers and manufacturers get into that space. Is you've got to, if you want to compete with Amazon on your personal thing, you've got to meet that customer expectation that I can get it. Otherwise, you're behind.
Or
Right?
find something else that you're good at, like the custom engraving or the custom design or something.
Something that you can't buy on Amazon.
Right.
Which that is, jewelry is actually one of those. I've looked at it, and that's the one category that Amazon only controls two categories, and one of them is jewelry, where they actually validate all the sellers and stuff because they're very particular about who's fulfilling stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah. So that's really, really important, is to find out how you can offer value apart from anybody else. And that's your
yeah,
monopoly control right there.
that's monopoly control. What can you charge a price for?
So
Yeah,
so let's move to the final eighth driver, about
yeah,
that, about
yeah,
what happens if you get hit by a truck. I'm sure that's
yeah.
not how you mean to express it, but essentially that's what it is, right?
That's exactly what it is. The last one we call hub and spoke, and this is not to be offensive to owners or people that have that, but you have to think to yourself, are you creating a job? Or are you creating a business? And I saw a lot of people who were just creating a job. And that's the reason we call it hub and spoke, because if the owner is managing all the sales relationships. So I have all the sales relationships, and all the employees have to report directly to me, and I'm managing all the employees. And I have all the relationships with the supplier. So I put myself in the hub, and the entire universe circles around me. Well, I mean, that kills value. I mean, just dead. Because when you try to go sell from a buyer standpoint, when you walk out the door, the entire business just walks out the door, right?
Right.
And so, if you really, really want to create value, it's really more of thinking to yourself of like, hey, can I, how can I work myself out of a job, right? Like, how can I work myself out so I don't have to do that? And honestly, it's actually kind of a fun one to think about in the senses, because it's say, hey, you can challenge yourself in this category with taking a vacation. Can you take a weekend off? Right? Can you turn off, or maybe just start with that? Can I take 2 days off with the
Right.
weekend and put everything down? Then
Right.
maybe it's, can I take an entire week? Can I go to a week with my family to the beach, and will the business continue? Right? And then I always try to get down to the question I asked myself was, what would it take for me to be gone for 30 days? Because 30 days is typically a full cycle, right? Like everything has to kind of happen in a 30-day cycle. And so I would write out all the things, like if I was gone for 30 days, here are all the things that would fall down, right? And so
Right.
then that's where you start working on building up your employees to be able to take those things off, start working on your delegation practices. You start working on, and if you get to that point, this is where that freedom comes, right? So yeah, I mean,
Right.
it's awesome to think like, hey, I don't have to work for 30 days as an owner. Well, now all of a sudden I got a choice. Trust me, buyers will be beating down your door to buy that business because I don't have to step in. I mean, if you're like, hey, you know, a lot of it's called absentee,
We've
right? If I can be an
delegated everything.
absentee owner,
Yeah.
so then you have the choice as the owner. I can, what they call, chair it. So I just sit on the board and my employees run the business and I pull the profit, right? Or, I can pass it on to my kids,
Hmm.
right? So that'd be another option. And then, like I said, you got people that you can sell it. So talk about timing and what your personal goals are on
Hmm.
that side. But so that gives you that choice, that gives you freedom to do pieces. And so thinking about that hub and spoke piece is really thinking about that owner and where they are in that position. And that's it's that's always one of those where with the business you're the biggest problem, but the good news to that is you're also the
Asset.
opportunity for solution,
Right.
right? So
Right.
the biggest opportunity for solution. So that's hub and spoken. And like I said, that really builds. That one I would say is probably the most difficult. I mean, there's going to be times. I mean, obviously, when you're working or you're building, you've got to be in the business. You've got to be working on
Hmm.
it. I mean, that's where if you could take 30 days, I mean, you could spend all that 30 days just working on it and creating more opportunities and doing those pieces. But
Yeah.
really thinking about what your role is. So are you allowing the work and the busyness to validate you, or are you actually trying to build a company that would be standalone, right? Because they're supposed to be a continuing entity, which means that they would continue without any one person or in
Right.
perpetuity, right? Like
Right.
people don't persist in perpetuity, but companies do persist in perpetuity.
Right. But it's so validating of the point you made earlier about cross training and everything like that. It's really important that you hire well at the very beginning, that people that can grow into their position, that you can trust and not um, and not have to worry about that manager in your fast food store, that you're going to know that they're going to take over the way you would take over. So you have to train them to be like as responsible as you would be. And there's so many good ways to do that by getting the whole company involved in your mission statement and your values and all this. I love how all these 8 steps really are, they all just keep you thinking ahead. Because
Yep.
I
And I
know
said, oh,
as an entrepreneur, I got in business so I can have a lot of freedom, so I can
yeah,
work around and create the kind of business I want. And
yeah,
you've got to be thinking ahead. I think that's probably why you're in business too.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
I've never lacked. I guess that's one of my special gifts. I've never lacked thinking ahead. So, a lot of times our superpower is also our kryptonite. That can cause worry too. But yes, being able to kind of visualize down the way and thinking ahead is something that you need to do, and that's where as a business made simple coach, right, Donald, like, I mean, that's where a lot of this comes in. I mean, one of his core tenets is having that owner's mindset, right? Developing an owner mindset. So if you have employees that have that owner's mindset, and using his teaching to bring up your employees, right, it's a way of having that educational piece in there. So
right?
that is where all these things kind of come together. I mean, employees are a challenge. That's the balance, right? Because we just said you want
Right.
to work yourself out and rely on your employees, but you also want to have the procedures where if that manager leaves, somebody,
Somebody could slip right in.
you got the next person groomed that's going to move right in, and
That's right.
there might be a little bit of a transition, but it's not going to knock you off the horse. So
That's
yeah,
right.
so
So, okay, so Jonathan, can you list those 8 principles,
yeah.
the
So I mean,
eight
this we
values,
kind of go.
so we can
Yeah, we can go
remember,
through those. So the 8 drivers, again, just to kind of review, go through them, is financial performance, right? So we're looking at that. We're looking at our growth potential.
right?
We're looking at the Switzerland structure and our neutrality.
Right?
We're looking at reoccurring revenue, how we're
Mm-hmm.
getting people in, our teeter totter, our
Right?
cash flow. We're looking at our customer satisfaction score. We're looking at our monopoly control, what's differentiating us. And then we're looking at hub and spoke. So we're looking at our position as the owner.
And it's just so important to be always working with the end in mind, because even if what you said early is you don't have to be thinking of selling your business to start doing this stuff,
Yeah.
but you will increase your business and the value of your business if you keep in mind the 8 drivers of
Yeah.
company value, whether you're going to sell it or not.
But exactly. I mean, that's what I always try to tell people. I think that's a little bit of a hard sell sometimes. But I mean, even if you wanted to pass it on to the next generation, or like you said, you just wanted the freedom. I mean, I think that is true. A lot of people, I don't think they can envision, like, they want to get to that place where it's like, I just own the business and maybe work 20 hours. That's a hard place to get to, but it's a great place to get to,
Right?
right? And
Absolutely.
and you got to think about it like, if you think about it like you were trying to sell it, even if you didn't want to, and that's the place you want to get to.
Yeah.
That's the path that will get you to that chairman space too. I mean, it doesn't matter which of those 3 paths you want. Um, Thinking about it and building value um, will will get you there.
Well, thank you so much. This made it really, really clear. But one thing we haven't done is we did mention your company when I was introducing you, but how do people find you? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I mean, you can get in touch with me through my website. Is always great. So that's Soko Ventures. So that's SOKO Ventures.com, and they can reach out to me there and contact me through that as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn Jonathan Bohn, Bohn. So that's just, I think it's LinkedIn /n/ and then my name, Jonathan Bohn. So you can find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me there as well. I always love connecting with business owners through there and try to put out some valuable material on these aid drivers and the other things that I've got going on and just trying to share.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Do you have any words of wisdom that we haven't covered that you want to make sure our audience knows before we close up?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just think about building that value. And, the last thing I'd leave is say on an encouragement note, just keep working, keep building and keep going. Is owning a business is a lot of hard work, but it is rewarding and you can create a huge impact. One of my things is being the first domino, and that is owners. Not only do you change your life, but you change the life of your family, but then you change the life of your employees, and then you change the life of the community that you're in, that you're all operating in. So, you're the leader, and we need such good leadership right now.
That's a perfect note to end on. So thank you for your encouragement and your wisdom, Jonathan. And we'll see you
Thanks for
again
having me.
soon.